In this clip, we'll talk about adding animation to our models inside of Maya. So animation is the act of moving something over time. It's how we get complex scenes to create our video games, our shorts, and our feature films. You can see many of the animation controls and interface elements at the bottom of our screen as we talked about. Here's the time slider, and this shows how many frames we currently have in our scene. So right now, you can see we're at frame 1 over here on the time slider. Also down here, you can see 1 here and 1 here. Also on the range slider, you can see the one on the left-hand side. Over here, you can see we go to frame 120. Here it's reflected in this box and also here. This 200 is the total number of frames in our project. Right now, we're only looking at 1 to 120 as shown by the range slider. We can change this by dragging this range slider, which will change which frames we're able to see on the time slider. So if we'd like to see all of the frames in our scene, we can just drag this all the way to the right. But if we need to get a more detailed view, we can move this down and concentrate just on a specific section. We can also move this range slider anywhere we want. So let's go ahead and leave this at 200. So we have frame 1 to 200, but we don't know exactly how much time that is until we look at the settings for the speed. So right now we're set to 24 frames per second. So with 200 frames at 24 frames per second, that's going to be roughly about 8 seconds of animation. Now, that's one of the industry standards. For film, it's 24 frames per second, but we also have other frame rates here. We can choose some broadcast rates that are near 30, and that would be more like 6 seconds. So that's something that you definitely want to choose before you start your project. It'll be based on the project that you're working on, and it'll be a set number, so you'll have to do it at 24 or 30, depending on what you're doing. Well, let's set ours to 24. So then if we hit play, it's going to play through that animation. And right now, we don't have any animation at all, and so nothing is really happening. So in order to add animation, what we want to do is set keyframes at particular spots in the animation to change values associated with our object. So for instance, if we want to move it a particular distance, we want to set a keyframe in that particular channel to change over time. So let's say that we want our ship to kind of fly back towards us. So the first thing we'll want to do is set an initial position for this. And so we'll set our frame to frame 1, and we'll just drag that over. And then I'm going to use the transform tools and just select this box, which is the control for this ship. And I'm just going to move it back over here and get it in whatever initial position that you want. It doesn't have to be exactly like mine. We can go to rotate, and I can rotate this as well. And let's kind of rotate it and get it into something like that. You can see those values have changed over here in our channel box. In order to set keyframes, there are several ways we can do this. We can choose individual channels in the channel box, right-click and say key selected. You can see that a red tick has showed up on our time slider. We can also hit the S key on our keyboard, and you can see that that actually keyed all of the channels here. So it's keyed not only the translate, but also the rotation values that we've added. Now right now, if we play this, nothing's going to happen because we only have one keyframe. If we were to move this and then scrub without setting a keyframe, it's going to pop back to that initial position that's set by that keyframe. So nothing's going to change until we add another keyframe. So let's come in about halfway or so, and then we'll come in and move this into a new position. Kind of rotate it a little bit. And now let's hit S again. You can see that these channels are pink right now before I hit the S key. When I hit S, they're going to turn red. So pink means that they are animated, but there's no keyframe on the current frame, whereas red means that they're animated and there's a keyframe on the current frame. So now we have two keyframes, one at frame 1, you can see it pops back there, and the other around frame 90. Now what's great is that Maya will interpolate the position and the rotation values between these two keyframes, so that if we play this through, you can see it goes from the first position to the second position. We can scrub through that to see it as well. Let's continue to add keys. Let's add a key at the very end. And we'll kind of move this forward and over, kind of rotate it towards us. And then I think that is, we can also change these values here and kind of move this towards us a little bit more. And then again, hit S to set a keyframe. Now, if we play this through, you can see it sort of glides towards us. Now, the timing of this is dictated by the length between our keyframes. So this animation is happening from frame 1 to frame 20, so around 8 seconds at 24 frames per second. If we want it to happen quicker, we could have set our keyframes closer together, or we can go in and we can actually hold down Shift, drag and select all of our keyframes, and then we can actually scale those down. I'm just dragging those down, and you can see the distance between those keyframes is shrinking. If we jump back using this key to the very first frame there and hit play, it's going to happen much quicker. We can also select those keyframes by hitting Shift and move them individually. So if I wanted to move this particular frame, again, more space between the keyframes will make things take longer, less space will make them go faster. Let's take a quick look at what's going on behind the scenes as Maya interpolates these keyframes. Let's go up to Windows, Animation Editors, and let's go into the Graph Editor. Here we can see what's actually happening with those values in those channels. We've got our control ship selected, and here you can see those channels, translate X, Y, and Z, and rotate X, Y, and Z are the main ones that we're changing. If we select one of these, you can see that reflected here. These are the values of that channel changing over time. You can see that there is actually a smooth transition between one position and the next position. If we select a particular keyframe, we can change the tangent handles to make it smoother or flatten it out. Here, the model would move, slow down its movement, and then speed it back up again. This is more of a smooth transition. So you can go in and actually modify how that interpolation happens, whether you want it to be a completely linear interpolation or like this, very smooth spline-based interpolation. We can, in here, move our keyframes just as we did on the timeline. Keep in mind, though, that when you do that, if you're working on one particular channel, those can move off of keyframes. So for instance, if I move the rotate Z frame off here, you can see it actually creates a new keyframe. So not all of the keyframes are located on the same frame anymore. So just be aware of that. There are buttons up at the top where you can change your tangents. So for instance, we could just make that linear to make a straight line, or we could smooth it out, add some ease in and ease out, and then we can go in and manually change those as well, back to where we were. So the graph editor is a great way to see kind of the basic structure, the curves that are associated with the animation that you're creating. So that's how you can add basic keyframes to start moving your objects around your scenes over time. Make sure to check out your speed, how many frames you have in your scene, and then make sure to add those keyframes, and you can manipulate those on the time slider as needed. There's a lot more in the animation toolset in Maya for you to explore, so make sure to check that out if you're interested. Next, you'll take a look at how to add materials and textures in Maya.